Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel, Esoteric Explorer. Today I'm joined by someone who has had a profound impact on my understanding and knowledge of ancient history, astrology, etymology, and many other related subjects. Hugh has recently published a new book, The Origin of Time, a sequel to his first two books, The Origin of the Zodiac and The Origin of Numbers. And all three books are created around arguably the most important ancient artifact on Earth, the star maps of Gwynedd located in Wales. So in this particular video, I'll be asking Hugh a number of questions on his new book. And without further ado, here he is.
Hello.
Hugh. How you doing?
Hello, Paul. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. That was very touching. Thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure, mate. It's a pleasure. It's an incredible discovery. And with every book, it just gets more and more fascinating. So I've read this twice pretty much now. And it's just an amazing source of knowledge on our ancient ancestors. So thank you so much for putting in all the work. So today, Hugh, I'm going to be asking you a number of questions. And let's see how we go. So the first question I've got for you is this. Since writing your first book, The Origin of the Zodiac, you have now discovered that the ancestors mapped out the constellations in the southern celestial hemisphere in their star map of Gwynedd. This would suggest that the ancient people of Gwynedd have travelled throughout both hemispheres and that perhaps a global language was used at this time. And we're talking around 25 to 30,000 years ago. So do you believe that the Welsh language or ancient Brittonic was the language being used in Atlantis?
Wow. There's a lot in there, Paul, in that question. It's a great question. Great question. And so, you then go on to, well, what is or what was or where was Atlantis? But let's pick up that question apart and look at the various components. So my work is based around the star maps of Gwynedd, as you have so wonderfully introduced. And we're able to see the star maps of Gwynedd because the language in which they are written is still existing there, and that is Welsh, or Cymraeg, to use its Welsh name. It's probably the closest thing we have to ancient British or ancient Brittonic. I don't know where these people originated. They may have originated somewhere else. And when we look at migrating people, they do move a long distance over a long period of time. It may be that there were several migrations backwards and forwards from Britain to other parts of the world and back again. And other people I'm working with are also researching in this area. But as you rightly say, the southern constellations are also accurately mapped on the ground in Gwynedd. In my first book, The Origin of the Zodiac, I sort of stopped looking for constellations on the ground once I'd found the 12 constellations around the ecliptic and the northern circumpolar constellations that sit inside the ecliptic. And they're the ones we see most regularly from the northern hemisphere. And there are far more ancient constellations in the northern hemisphere than in the southern hemisphere, which points to it being a northern hemisphere centric culture or civilization that defined the heavens. But nonetheless, there are constellations from the southern hemisphere also mapped on the ground in Gwynedd, like Monoceros, even Phoenix. And I stopped looking for those constellations when I concluded The Origin of the Zodiac, because I sort of believed that the southern constellations wouldn't be there. We'd been told that the ancient civilization from which we have descended, that they weren't very good at doing anything. They were just hunter-gatherers. They had really low achievements, but that's completely wrong. And I was suffering from this illusion that had been foisted upon me during my childhood, during my education. Our ancient ancestors had amazing abilities. They charted the entire heavens, and to be able to do that, you've got to really appreciate the movement of the celestial bodies to a far greater extent than people probably understand it today.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a lot of distractions today, and all of our entertainments we get through television, mobile phone now, and laptops and things like that. But our ancient ancestors didn't have any of that. All their stories, all their entertainment was written above them in the night sky. So they really understood it to a high level. Mm. And you're right when you said, did that ancient people, had they traversed the continents and the oceans to be able to see the southern constellations and then accurately map them on the ground in Gwynedd in Neolithic stone? I would say yes, they had travelled the continents or the oceans, probably the oceans. They understood the southern constellations around Centaurus, including Crux, which is called the Southern Cross, and that's very close to the southern celestial pole. And those constellations as a group are virtually invisible in North Wales. They're only very slightly visible at the opposite end of the processionary cycle when the wobble of the Earth's axis allows them to be visible in part. And they're not visible enough to be able to be seen as full constellations, yet they're accurately mapped on the ground in Gwynedd. And Centaurus, the main constellation of that group, is located on top of Mount Snowdon. Mm. So if you are going to create a star map on the ground that covers 1 million acres, which the star maps of Gwynedd does, the points that are the most vague, you might argue, could be added as an afterthought, or if they suddenly realize that they need to add something to the map. But the constellation Centaurus is centered on the highest mountain in Snowdonia or Gwynedd, which is Mount Snowdon. And you cannot reallocate a constellation onto an important mountain like that just to as an error solve. You have to start knowing that where the constellations are in the night sky, and start with a blank canvas on the ground, and then start to build your star map. So they must have known about those constellations in the southern hemisphere, and they must have traveled at least to the equator to be able to see them in any sort of like clarity. I mean, I went to the Canary Islands I think last year and was able to see some of them with a degree of clarity. So yeah, you have to go that far south at least.
Fascinating, and that leads me on to another question, because many academics point to the fact that there is no evidence for an ancient maritime culture. So obviously you can't concur with this. So why is this the case? Why do we not have any evidence of an ancient maritime culture?
Well, I don't agree that there wasn't an ancient maritime culture. And I think the phrase is, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So the fact that we haven't found any boats that are 20,000 years old doesn't mean that those boats didn't exist. They would have been made of wood and they would have rotted away. I think the fact that the southern constellations are accurately mapped on the star maps of Gwynedd does point to an ancient maritime civilization, or certainly a civilization that had maritime capability. I think, I don't know where, as I said, I don't know where these people originated. I think they migrated forwards and backwards over long periods of time. And they obviously knew about the features of gwynedd when they wanted to set out a star map. And they must have understood very large areas of land to be able to go there and decide that this was the best place to set up the star map. So it wasn't set up by an indigenous people. In fact, it's useless for an indigenous people. The area of the star maps of Gwynedd covers 1,500 square miles, 1 million acres. And I don't know how many people live there now, but it must be hundreds of thousands, if not are getting on for a high fraction of 1 million people. And most of their agriculture and industry is based around hill farming. And so, the star maps of Gwynedd go back 2,000 years, 4,000 years, where that would have been the predominant occupation of the region. The star maps are completely useless for that sort of people, and yet they maintained it. They've maintained all the field boundaries, all the stone circles, all the standing stones. They've maintained the language. They've taken great pride in it all, and it's a joy to drive around Gwynedd and see all the land features still preserved. So an ancient people must have gone there with the purpose of setting up the star maps because of the advantages of that location.
So they had a reverence for their ancestors, but possibly they didn't really understand what these stone circles and various things were pointing towards.
The people recently, they did absolutely have a reverence. And if you go to Gwynedd, I would recommend all your viewers to go there and soak up the atmosphere. But if you go to the churches, and all the churches are set on ancient stone circles, most of the churches were rebuilt in the Victorian era, but the yew trees within the sacred circles are thousands of years old. If you look at the gravestones, they all have very ancient iconography that fits in with the star maps. It's only the more recent gravestones since the Second World War where people have diverted from the custom of revering the star map and which was collinear with their religious beliefs or their spiritual beliefs. So most of the gravestones in Gwynedd have a sunburst on it for the rising and setting sun, and or a branch, which is a gwynedd. And as you've read the book, you know that gwynedd is a very important concept with regard to the star maps of Gwynedd and the Great Rings of Time, because gwynedd is spirit. And a goose is a gwynedd, but also a branch. A gwynedd can mean branch, stock, stem, which means lineage. A gwynedd fill is a wild animal. In this context, gwynedd means spirited. And Snowdon's ancient name is Withfa, and the with is a shortening of gwynedd. So that means the place of spirit.
And as you're saying now, I'm thinking of Gobekli Tepe. And there's a pillar, if I remember rightly, there's a pillar that has seven geese?
Yeah,
7 geese
along the bottom plinth.
That's right.
So, and that's sort of carbon dated around 10,000 years old.
Yeah.
That's an interesting pillar because, and in my book, The Origin of Time, I do talk about some of the pillars at Gobekli Tepe because they demonstrate a commonality of the language, as we also see in Egypt, because Egyptian pharaohs often preceded their cartouche, their name, with a goose and a sun disk. So
Yeah,
I
wow.
think I did talk about that in the book.
Mm.
So yes, Welsh is very, very ancient, and the star maps of Gwynedd show that it's, as you've introduced there, maybe 20, 50, maybe 70,000 years old as a language.
Wow, incredible. And you mentioned churches a minute or so ago. It would seem that churches were built on sacred land where the heavens were previously observed. So I've also read that many churches are built where ley lines cross each other. So how much did the early Christian church understand about our ancient past, and why did they choose to suppress it, would you say?
Well, that's another multifaceted question.
Yeah, just a bit.
So you'll have to remind me of the bits of it, because as I give my explanation, I might miss bits out. I mean, we managed to miss a bit out about Atlantis from the first question, and maybe we'll come back to that at the end,
Right. Okay.
or at another time. But coming back to this present question, did the Christian people understand, what was it? Sorry, Paul.
Did the early Christian church understand about our ancient past? Because they're putting churches on some of these points.
Absolutely, 100%. They understood
Yeah.
it. In fact, I would say that Christianity was an evolution of this religion.
That's very interesting.
So this is one of the origins of Christianity. And it's not really my specialist subject, but I do know that there are researchers in this field that say the first Christian church is located in South Wales, and it's dated to very soon after the death of Christ.
Mm. I was going to say, some people say that the first church is located, or was located, at Glastonbury and was founded by Joseph of Arimathea. But then I guess these areas like Wales and Glastonbury are both in the south, in the southwest of Britain.
Yeah,
so,
but they may be linked. And the first, so yes, absolutely, the early Christian church in Britain was an evolution of the prior druidic solar cult, and that's why the Christian saints have the halo, which is the sun disk behind their head.
Mm.
And they were very open about that, and that's not contentious for anybody to consider. Even today, we all know what the halo meant. There's a number of other videos on my YouTube channel where I talk about Uriel, and I talk about Uriel in my book as well. So Uriel's depicted in churches with holding the orb and the flaming sword or a rod. And Uriel's role was to measure the universe, because the people who measured the universe in time and space, they controlled everything. And so that was then again borrowed into the Christian religion and depicted in churches on stained glass windows along with the other saints. So yeah, absolutely, that the early Christian church evolved out of this spiritual understanding of the heavens.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, let's go back in time a bit. On the subject of star maps, you propose that both Stonehenge and Avebury are star maps, and you have translated the original name for Stonehenge, the Giant's Dance, as meaning aperture of the dawn, which you suggest is a far better description of the reason for its construction. So could you elaborate on this? What do the star maps of Stonehenge and Avebury represent, and why were they constructed? That's easy questions so far.
Well, again, this is a little bit off my my main area of expertise, and I refer to Stonehenge in my book because, as an introduction, I'm trying to show what star maps have been over the thousands of years, and I talk about modern star maps. So a watch with our hands is a modern star map, because we're actually charting the progress of the sun across the sky. And at midday, both hands will be at the top of the clock, which is where the sun is. And so we go back to the different star maps all through the medieval era, and then we can go back to sort of Rome, the Greeks, go back even further to Stonehenge. Stonehenge was a solar and lunar observatory. I think I've been there many times now, and I've been there with Hugh Newman, and we've had various presentations. I don't know why they decided to make it in such big stones, because they could have made it in smaller stones. So there had to be a social element to the construction. I think there were other constructions on the site before the stones we see there today. I can't remember their name now. There's 57 post holes that go around the Stonehenge, and they've been carbon dated far older than Stonehenge, and like 10,000 years old. So it shows that there are people been on that site, and the number 57, I think it's 57, is useful if you are trying to map the progress of the sun and the progress of the moon together by moving a series of pegs around the circle, and when at different speeds, and when the pegs cross over, there is a possibility of an eclipse. So that would be why they had so many post holes. So we know that Stonehenge was an observatory, and something similar was happening at Avebury. No doubt there was all manner of social and commercial things going on as well. It was a meeting place. It was a place where people did trade, and they're very important sites.
Well, I was reading some Geoffrey of Monmouth. I think it was Geoffrey last night. I think it was book 6, and he was talking about Merlin, and because Merlin is synonymous with Stonehenge, and Merlin was saying to a king that all the stones have medicinal properties, and that people somehow bathed in water with the stones, which immediately reminded me of something that Maria Wheatley told me once, which was that up until I think it was maybe the 1950s, one of the stones at Stonehenge was producing water. And when they couldn't find the source of the water, they concreted it up.
Yeah.
I thought that was a bit of a coincidence, and that was very interesting.
Yeah, so I at the Megalithomania conference in May this year, I did a talk on a Sunday morning, and Maria talked the previous day about Stonehenge, and I listened to her presentation, which was very good, and I recommend her book that she's just published. Have you got a copy? Well done.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, it is a really important book, because all of this knowledge has been brought together in one place and in a modern context. And she also talks about all the people and the different shaped skulls they have. So that there were different types of people here.
This is very interesting because it coincides with Brian Forster's information and his research into the elongated skull people in South America. So again, that maybe points to a global civilization, possibly.
Yes, yeah. It's really off my sort of area of expertise.
We're going off on a tangent here. I apologise.
I'll just correct myself a minute ago. They are the 56 Aubrey post holes, not 57, 56 post holes, the Aubrey post holes around Stonehenge.
Brilliant. Okay. Right. Let's get back to your book. Bear with me one moment. Right. let's talk about Enoch.
Yeah.
Arabs and Muslims know Enoch as Idris.
Yeah.
According to academia, Enoch was a patriarch who lived in the patriarchal age and lived to 365 years old before the Great Flood. Now, Helena Blavatsky claimed that Enoch Idris was the first Grand Master of Freemasonry, and in the Samaritan Book of the Secrets, it's claimed that Enoch Idris is buried in Mount Ebal, Ebal, in Palestine. So, who was Enoch, and why do you associate him with Thoth, architect of the universe?
Enoch, we are told, as you've just said, is great grandfather of Noah. I didn't know that he was reputedly the first. What did you say? The first Freemason or something?
According to Helena Blavatsky, she said that he was the first Grand Master of Freemasonry.
The first Grand Master. There's not really a lot spoken about Enoch in the Bible. They do say that he gets to 365 years old before he goes up to be with God. I think that is also an inference. I don't think it actually says that, or he goes up to heaven. And we don't know where he was when at the point where he went up to heaven. But gwynedd, gwyn is white, and it's also the color of heaven. And the eth component, gwynedd, makes a place or a concept. So gwynedd could be heaven. And we do know that Idris was the ancient British name for Enoch, and that Idris was was a giant and one of the three great astronomers of Britain in ancient British mythology. And Idris charted the heavens from atop the mountain Cadair Idris, which is in Gwynedd. It's the center of Gwynedd, and it's where the constellation of the Plough is. So a Cadair is a chair in Welsh. It is also a controller. So just like a chair, it now is the controller of a committee. That comes from the Welsh, where it's a controller, and it comes from the smallest component of that word, ca, C-A, which means to keep or to hold. So a chairman of a committee is keeping and holding order, I suppose, and managing the direction.
It also means castle, doesn't it, as well? Or am I wrong on that?
Caer can mean castle, C-A-E-R, and it comes from the same root. So and this is a sort of a more modern interpretation of the word, because the word existed long before castles existed, and really means an enclosure.
Right.
And so K, C-A-E, which is so you have K, care. You can see how the word structure is building up. So a K is a field or an enclosure, from to keep to hold. And a care is a fortress, which they would build on top of a hill, normally within a circle. So coming back to Idris, he received instruction from Uriel. We're told that in the Book of Enoch. So we have a lot more material in the Book of Enoch than we have in the Bible. We know what instruction he received. He received instruction about the movement of the stars and the planets. So that would imply that Enoch didn't know this, and that someone else, Uriel, did know this. Uriel had all the information, which is why he's given the orb and the rod to represent his ability, or her. And Uriel then passed this information to Enoch, and this was done before Noah. We don't know how many generations. I'm taking great-grandfather or grandfather as a pinch of salt. It could have been 1,000 years. The fact that Enoch had already lived to 365 years, you've got to take with a pinch of salt, and 365 days in a year, so that it implies there is a celestial component to Enoch, and which might not be his age.
Well, many of the biblical characters in the patriarchal age lived allegedly very long lives, didn't they? Abraham.
They did. If you read the Bible and take it literally, we don't know how they're measuring years, though. They might have been measuring years in lunations, which are the cycles of the moon. And we see the same thing with the Babylonian gods, who lived incredibly long periods of time, tens of thousands of years, if we measure them by our present Earth years. But it's all very interesting. What more did you want me to say about Enoch? I can't remember all the components of the question.
I think we just about covered it, really. Who was Enoch? And why do you associate him with Thoth, architect of the universe?
Well, because, as you just said, Thoth is the Egyptian architect of the universe. And Idris, in ancient British mythology, charted the heavens, which is a similar job. And in the Book of Enoch, it's very detailed as to what instruction Enoch received, or Idris. And Enoch may actually be a title and not a name. So En means a being, or an essence, or a being, or a spirit. And so does the word El. They're very similar in meaning, and they can be used interchangeably. So Uriel has a similar meaning to Enoch. And all the angels had El at the end of their name. Raphael, Michael, Gabriel.
There are some people out there that say that the El is short for the Elohim. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
If you look in my Welsh dictionary, it's actually got Elohim written in there. So it's been the spelling slightly changed when it was employed in the Bible or in the Jewish religious books, and the root of it, and also the root of elf, they all got the same root, which is El, which means spirit, being, or essence. And in this context, it's a life essence.
Wow.
And En has the same. So En-och, so och, the suffix, can mean a diminutive. In this sense, Enoch is the student. Uriel means the, Re, chief, El, spirit, being. Wow. Uriel is the teacher. Enoch is the student.
Wow, fascinating stuff.
So both of these names may be titles, and they're then passed. So when Uriel is passed the information to Enoch, Enoch becomes Uriel and then passes it on again.
Wow, that's amazing. Great answer. Brilliant. Okay, let's move on. Now, chapter 5 in your new book, The Origin of Time. Possibly my favorite chapter. So your description in chapter 5 of the metaphysical concepts of time and how it pertains to our own mortality and the recycling of our souls was an entirely new concept on me, and one that resonated on a very deep level. Could you walk us through this stunningly beautiful concept, and could we speculate on its origins?
Well, firstly, Paul, thank you for your kind words there. And
it was wonderful to read. It really was. I really enjoyed it.
And I have to confess, I wasn't a deeply spiritual person before I started researching the star maps. And I have really gained a lot from becoming aware of our ancient ancestors' spirituality, as far as I have interpreted it. Mm-hmm. And now I'm trying to summarize it in my book, and the more I look at it, the more I find out. So at the moment, I think it's a very good summary, but I'm sure that over time more will become apparent, and I hope other people continue their research. But you know, in this discussion, we're having a bit of a question and answer session, and I will do a presentation of or a summary of my book, so that you can put that out on your channel. But the three rings of time, one of the great hypothesis of my book, The Origin of Time, is that all the constellations sit on three rings of time. You know, when you look at a book of constellations, or go on and use Stellarium and look at the constellations, they look like a complete muddle of ideas that have no joining concepts or meaningfulness. But actually, the complete opposite is the truth. The truth is that every single constellation is in its right location on three rings, and it is named for its location and it's what it does, and it is also the constellations on either side of it are correctly positioned and named and have correct functions. So the whole thing is like one great symphony where they're all playing in harmony together.
Yeah.
And when you are able to appreciate that, you can see the great intelligence of our ancient ancestors.
Absolutely.
I mean, they had similar abilities to what we have. In fact, they had more ability in this regard.
Well, I think they had less distractions, definitely, you know.
Yes. I think they had a lot of fun, but so, you know, they just had different distractions. And the celestial sphere is made out of three rings. You can't have a sphere unless you have three circles in three dimensions. The sphere would collapse. And the three great rings of time are the ecliptic, which is the movement of time every second. You know, we're talking right now, and time is moving on. We're aware of that. We arrange to meet at a certain time, and tomorrow is a different day. So this is the sort of like the scientific, I call it the metronomic tick-tock of time. That's the ring of the ecliptic. The second ring of time is the journey of creation. So you can only have the second ring if you have the first ring. You can't conceptualize a journey of creation unless you've got a temporal framework to fit it in. Once you've then got both of those two rings, you can then conceptualize the spiritual journey. And again, it is pointless trying to conceptualize a metaphysical spiritual journey without understanding the journey of humanity from a point of origin to where those people are conceiving humanity or the heavens at that time. Even though it was quite a long time ago, they had still an awareness of their journey from an origin, which we've actually lost today. We have no awareness at all. And when people talk about it, they say it's hocus pocus, or they rubbish it, and they shouldn't, because our ancient ancestors were intelligent people. So the ring of the third ring of time, which is the spiritual ring, is the Milky Way. And our ancient ancestors were greatly aware of the Milky Way, and more so than we are again today, because light pollution means that in a lot of places you can't see the Milky Way. But that our ancient ancestors didn't have that problem. And they must have wondered. I mean, I haven't got a sort of a time machine. I've not asked them directly. But when you look at how they've named all the constellations and the order they're in and all their accoutrements, you know, they've all got either things they hold or things they've done or bits of mythology. It describes a grand concept for this particular ring, the Milky Way, which I also call the Ring of Souls, because that's what it is. You know, our ancient ancestors were aware of their mortality. They were aware that they had parents, grandparents, they had children, that people died, that people were born, and they wanted to have a greater sense of their reality than just a matter of fact. So they conceptualized that the Milky Way was all the souls of their ancestors, and that the soul of the individual arrived at birth and traveled through the mortal world and then passed. And when people pass, they then go into the underworld and join the ancestors again. And this is a continual
Cycle.
a repeating cycle. And I call it the great travelator, you know, a bit like an escalator, a travelator, you know, one of those horizontal ones that keeps moving and people are on it. So I think they had a great idea of this. This concept of gwynedd or spirit, which I have mentioned earlier in one of your other questions. I think they conceptualized this as being in the far south of the celestial sphere, because they couldn't really see it. They sort of had a sense that it was, you know, somewhere else, not always there visible, but it brought all that spirit. And you can go from these constellations down in the deep south, Centaurus, on the Milky Way. That is the spirit world, and it brings goodness into the mortal world as it crosses the ecliptic. That is the start of life, and then it feeds the mortal world with this concept of Arwen, which is goodness and bliss, and you know, everything that could be benevolent to people, and that's continually fed into the mortal world. And then as we cross the ecliptic again, when we pass into the underworld, you know, we go on our last great journey to the west to join our ancestors again.
Well, it was perhaps this aspect of the book, more than any other, that I really felt the connection between myself and the ancestors, because it was beautifully written, that part of the book. So thank you for that. Thank you for that very much. Right, let's get back to the questions. Where are we up to? Let's have a quick look. Let's move on. If we can briefly go back to Gobekli Tepe that we touched upon earlier. There was a couple of questions that relates to that particular site. So one thing that interested me, and I think I've heard this before somewhere else, but I've never understood why. Why was Gobekli Tepe sequentially opened and then closed over the thousands of years since its construction? So what was going on with that? Would you like to speculate?
Yeah, I can speculate. I mean, I discuss Gobekli Tepe in my book because it helps develop the idea of a global language, because we can see evidence of the language in Gobekli Tepe, and that has been usefully carbon dated to around 10,000 BC, 12,000 years ago, which is one half of the processionary cycle. They've only excavated or about 5% of Gobekli Tepe, and at the moment it's only being presented as a visitor centre. All excavation has ceased, and why did they continually backfill these different enclosures? It's a very good question, and I would have to speculate, but each of these enclosures is has a function of being able to monitor the heavens. That's what I think. And I would direct your viewers to see some of Hugh Newman's videos on his Megalithomania YouTube channel, because these enclosures are particularly shaped, and they're very similar in shapes to stone circles in Britain that Professor Alexander Thom surveyed. So these stone circles in Britain were created so that they could monitor the heavens. And I think the enclosures at Gobekli Tepe were created for the same reason. The T-shaped pillars in the center were also had a function in that. And at my Megalithomania presentation, also in my book, I do say that if you can draw a line from Gobekli Tepe to Karahan Tepe, you can also draw a line from Gobekli Tepe to Seburg, going southwest. And the line from Gobekli Tepe to Karahan Tepe goes southeast. And these two lines are the sunrise on the summer solstice.
Wow. Okay.
And Gobekli Tepe is a particularly interesting location with regard to monitoring the heavens, because if you go and look at a topographical map of the area, it's the highest mound for quite a long distance in any direction.
Right.
It sits to the north of the Haran Plain, which is quite a lot lower. And Karahan Tepe, which is a distance away, is actually visible from Gobekli Tepe.
Ah, didn't know that.
Yeah. So it's also the sunrise solstice on the winter solstice. It's sunrise on the winter solstice, sunset on the summer solstice, the line from Gobekli Tepe to Karahan Tepe. So the two sites were obviously made to monitor the movement of the sun at the solstice. Now, because of procession of obliquity, where the Earth's axis changes
The tip,
the tip of the axis, we're currently at 23.5 degrees. Because that axis changes over a 40,000 year cycle, the location of sunrise on the solstice will change. And that may mean that when it's changed and your alignment has gone out of alignment, you have to build another enclosure and you backfill the last one.
Oh, right, yeah. Yeah.
And we see something similar in the temples on Malta. And there may be another reason, which they may also be aligned with monitoring the movement of Sirius. So we know that there's an alignment between Gobekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, and between Gobekli Tepe and Seburg, with the suns rising on the solstices. But there may be also other alignments with other celestial bodies, including Sirius. And again, they may want to backfill some of those enclosures to keep their knowledge from being known by other people. And eventually people left the whole area and they backfilled the whole thing. And they may well have left that area and returned back to Britain to rebuild the star maps of Gwynedd after the last ice age. Because there may have been activity in Britain, and we certainly know that because we've got skeletons of people 30 or more thousand years old in Britain. So we know that there were people here before the last ice age. And we know that people needed to, or we can imagine that people needed to observe several processionary cycles before they understood that the processionary cycle of 25,000 years, which is processionary of the equinox, and procession of obliquity, which is 40,000 years. You know, you've got to see these cycles several times to know they're repeating. You can't know that from one cycle. So these people, they brought that knowledge with them. And there was an event about 70,000 years ago. We don't know what caused the event, but we do know from DNA evidence that human adults reduced down to about 10,000. You know, it was a near human extinction event.
Mm.
And the ones that may have survived might have been sort of right in the middle of a continent somewhere, because we don't know what the cataclysm was, but maybe it was flood, maybe it was tidal wave, I don't know. But having the human population reduced down to a small number would allow one language to be shared by them all and then survive and become the predominant or the ancestral language. And that would also been the language that brought all of this celestial knowledge forward with it. And we see that written into the stars. We see an understanding of procession written into their names. And that has to be a people with a very ancient language.
It's mind-blowing stuff. So this is not the same cataclysm that would have ended Atlantis, because that's projected to be around 10,000 BC. So this is going back another 60,000 years.
Yeah, I think there have been a number. I mean, if you look at the geological epochs, you know, they've got many different extinction events over millions of years. You know, the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. We know from DNA records that there was a human bottleneck where adults were reduced to 10,000. That was 70,000 years ago. That coincided with, I think it was called the Toba supervolcano. But also there's a theory or a hypothesis that Jupiter joined our solar system around about 70,000 years ago, when Schultz's star passed very close to our solar system.
Yes, I read that in the book, and I didn't know that at all. I was quite surprised to hear that Jupiter is 70,000 years old, no less. So,
well, in our solar system, I mean, it's
yeah,
going to be much older than that, but it may well be a new arrival. In fact, that's what its name means. It means the youngest.
juvenile. Jupiter, yeah.
That's where we get juvenile from, the same word.
Yeah, that's fascinating stuff. And also the symbol is quite interesting for Jupiter as well, isn't it?
That's right, yes. So I do talk about all the symbols for the planets in The Origin of Time. It's also presented in The Origin of Numbers. Mm-hmm. The planets are important because they all have different orbital periods, and if you know those orbital periods, you can use the movement of the planets to create a calendar or a time measuring system. So that and all our numbers are related to the heavens, so that becomes important. The planets are important to our numbers, and they're also important to our measurement of time, which is why both books have a summary of the planets and their symbols and what those symbols mean.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find the symbol in the book for Jupiter. I found it earlier, and for some reason I can't find it now. It's a bit like a 4, isn't it? If I remember rightly.
I could try a screen share if you want.
Yeah, if you don't mind, because
you want to try a screen share, Paul?
Yeah, sure. Let's do that.
Okay. So you might be able to see the planets here and their signs.
Yeah.
Can you see that?
Yeah, see clearly.
So this is a double page from my book, The Origin of Time. It's also in The Origin of Numbers, and we've just been talking about Jupiter. Can you see my cursor?
Yes, we can.
Right, and this is the sign for Jupiter. So let's first talk about Earth. There's Earth. So the symbol for Earth puts the observer on Earth at the center of the celestial equator. There's the celestial equator, and they are the prime directions: north, south, east, and west. So again, we have this cross being the observing location of Earth, and we see Jupiter arriving into our frame of reference with this curve. That's Jupiter joining the solar system. And at the same time, Saturn was knocked out of its orbit, and we see that in its sign. There's our frame of reference from Earth again, and Saturn is knocked out of its previous orbit. That's when Jupiter joined the solar system. That's one hypothesis which would explain all these symbols and also their names. So all of the planets have names that describe them, and they all have names in just the one language that describe them, and that is this Welsh, ancient British, antediluvian, the pre-flood language of our ancient ancestors.
Fascinating stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. Right. Oh, hold on a minute. That's better. Let's just change that again. There we go. Brilliant. Okay. Right. Let's move on then. Going back to Gobekli Tepe, but also to the Olmecs of Central America and the Sumerians of Iraq. What does the famous handbag or bucket represent in depictions made by these people, would you say? Something that's always fascinated me.
Okay, well, maybe I'll do another screen share, but I have to find it now. Maybe it's there, is it? Well, as you said, this people call it handbag. It's not a handbag, it's a bucket. And if you go on to even Wikipedia will tell you that the Sumerians and the Akkadians called it a bucket. So I need to find the page, and I'll be able to screen share that with you. So bear with me a second.
No problem.
I mean, in today's world, we call it handbag because that's what we're familiar with. You know, nobody carries a bucket around with them these days. Nobody really knows how to use a bucket. Yeah.
Again, it's a symbol that kind of is used by many different ancient cultures. So,
okay, well, I found it now. I saved it as a separate image. So I'll share this image now. So I prepared this slide, if you like, for a previous presentation. So here we see the bucket, and you know, this is from the British Museum, and these wall friezes are of very high detail. I wonder if I can zoom in a bit without sort of crashing everything. You know, we can see sort of all this detail here. So and around the bottom of the garment. So this is a really important depiction. This is a message that they wanted to convey to us. And we're told that it is a bucket. And there are several words for buckets, and here I've shown a few of them. Kelwyn is a bucket. A crook is a bucket. A chlwy, or chlwy is a bucket. So most people in ancient times, they were not used to writing or reading words, and most people had manual jobs and writing implements and documents and things like that were probably not needed or were quite expensive. But those people that controlled or administered groups of people, they wanted to get messages across quickly, and they did this with images. And everybody knew that this bucket was conveying a message. And the message wasn't a bucket, it was something else. But you cannot make an image that says the deity or says a turnaround or a quick turn. How would you show that in a diagram or as a simple image that you can simply replicate in many different circumstances? Well, what you do is you associate a meaning with the bucket. And in this sense, the bucket means God. Kelwyn means Keli, the deity. Kel is the shorter component of this word, and that means to hide or be hidden. And we see these other meanings here, that a chlwy means a chlwig or a chlwyn or chlwib. And these are representative of the sun and the moon. So it's basically similar to Uriel's orb and rod, saying that they have the power to control the heavens or the interpretation of heavens. I'm just going to stop sharing now.
Okay, yeah.
Right.
So
we're back to it because we take for granted, I make this point and I don't think it really sinks in very much, but we take for granted that we have ability and access to time and ability to tell time. Later today when I want to do something else, I will be able to know what the time is. I will be able to cook something in the oven for half an hour because I can set an alarm. Tomorrow I'll be able to do something at midday or meet some people. If we do another talk, which I hope we are going to do, Paul, and I'll present my book, The Origin of Time, in summary, we will agree a certain time and then we'll meet online and I'll present my book. But in ancient times, that access to time and it's being free, accurate and ubiquitous was not available. People were at the mercy of other people who controlled time. If you were tending a flock or a group of people who had several flocks of goats and sheep and someone else was looking after the chickens and things like that, and you had to go to markets periodically, you had to know the different seasons. You may be able to tell the time through the day by looking at the sun, but over the seasons you were reliant on other people to tell the time, and they had control over what you did. So they were extremely powerful people. And Ptolemy standardized the constellations around about 150 of the current era because the Romans wanted more control over the whole Roman Empire. And people in Babylon they weren't using 12 constellations in Mesopotamia for their year. And even in the first Roman Republic, the time of Romulus and Remus, the first kings of Rome, sorry, not the first Roman Republic, they had a 10-month year with a long month over the winter. And there's been this continual battle between those people who wanted to use the moon as their means of controlling time and those people who wanted to use the sun. You know, even Scotland favoured using the moon, which is why the Scottish flag is a white cross on a blue background. That's the movement of the moon through it, from its maximum to its minimum positions over the course of 18.6 years. And the ancient name for England, Llögra, means land of the moon.
Yes, people of the moon. That's right. I've been recently reading about this in Marcel Abraham's The Great Migrations.
Yeah.
And it would seem that the English were considered to be very spiritual people, and that's part of what you're talking about there.
Yeah, I think they had similar spirituality to other people in Britain and elsewhere, so Brittany as well, and parts of Spain. In fact, all around the Atlantic coast, probably. But they were in constant conflict as to who was going to control time and whether they're going to use the moon or the sun. I think they shared a similar spirituality. In the end, the people who controlled the sun won, if you like, and that's why we have a solar-based year now of 365 days, and we're not in a lunar based year.
Great. Okay, brilliant. Right, let's move on because we're over the hour now, I believe. Yeah, we are. So let's keep going. The next question. Let's ask you something on astrology. Why is Aries given the role of the first constellation of the zodiac? Why is it always the first one?
Well, I've hypothesized it's the first one, and nowadays the year starts in January on the 1st, but in ancient times I'm suggesting that it started on 21st of March. And this is because this is the equinox, the spring or vernal equinox, and you also have the autumnal equinox on 21st of September. Now,
so I was going to say, is it in bulk, the one in spring? In bulk? Am I getting mixed up?
In bulk is around about the beginning of February.
Right.
That's one of the cross quarter days.
Right. Okay.
In the origin of time, I explain all the names, the origin of all these names, and yeah. So Easter is normally at around about 21st March. Easter is the first Sunday after the spring equinox. No, that's wrong. It's the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. I think that's right. Anyway, so again, we come back to those people who control time, controlled everything. So when is the best time of the year to start the year? Well, you might think it's at the winter solstice or at the summer solstice, but the sun at the solstice, which means to stand still, is sort of like in the same place for a period of about 6 days. Its movement on the horizon at sunrise or sunset is imperceivable. So it makes it a very poor time to start the year. You're going to be out by a few days. Whereas at the equinox, you know the sun, the daytime length and the nighttime length is the same length, and you can accurately measure this. Also, the sun will always rise due east on the equinox on the 21st March, 21st September. So that means that over a cycle of the procession of obliquity, where the solstice moves constantly, the equinox isn't moving. It's the only day of the year that the location of sunrise does not change due to precession of obliquity. So they chose that as 21st of March as the start of the year. And the cover photo of my book, The Origin of the Zodiac, is a stone circle in Gwynedd called Carreg Arthur, where the one of the prime stones at the center of the stone circle has a very pronounced V notch in it, about a foot deep, and it's pointed at sunrise on the equinox. And so when the sun rises at that location, we know, or the people then knew, that that was start of the year. And that clock is always right.
Right. Brilliantly explained. Thanks for that, Hugh. That's cleared that up. I apologise if you can hear some cats running around in the background going mental. My apologies for that. I'll keep on mute. Okay. Right. So a couple more questions for you before we finish today.
Okay.
On the subject of astrology, I'd like to ask you about Aquarius, the water bearer.
Yeah.
So this theme has been shared with many different cultures throughout time. Classical, Roman and Greek, ancient Egyptian, Mesopotamian, and even in ancient India and Chinese star mythology. So in your opinion, does this allude to a common origin? And if so, why are the other constellations not uniformly represented?
Well, yes, I think it does allude to a common origin, and we've already discussed this afternoon about how a human bottleneck and how a common language emerged because human beings had been reduced down to such a small level, and how that language has allowed to the bringing forth of the concepts of the constellations into the modern era. And it has survived intact in Gwynedd, and it was developed over, I think that the whole concept was developed over a prolonged period of time and received more and more detail. So I think some of the older components may have been taken to other parts of the world, but not the younger components. So perhaps I would say that the oldest constellations in the night sky are the ones that are very visible at the north, like the Plough. We see that commonly identified by all these cultures around the northern hemisphere and some in the southern hemisphere. But the four around the ecliptic are Taurus, which I think is the oldest constellation, and there is a depiction of Taurus at Lascaux in France that has been carbon dated something like 20,000 years old. Aquarius, Leo, and Scorpio. And these are the constellations where the four fixed stars on the ecliptic reside. In ancient times, the star Fomalhaut was in Aquarius. So I think it's the constellation was associated with this star, and that's why it's been shared across all these cultures.
Brilliant. Okay. So that leads me on to the Plough that you just mentioned. Can you describe the Plough creation myth and how it tells the story of the human species surviving the cataclysm and the subsequent migrations, repopulation and growth?
Okay, well, I'll go into this in more detail when I explain or give a summary of my books. But in short, the second ring of the three great rings of time is the ring of creation, and that recounts human resurgence from an origin, both after a great cataclysm and also from a flood. And both these halves of the great ring of creation terminate at the constellation Pegasus, which in ancient times was called the Great Field. And this square field represented civilization in the mortal plane between the four corner stars on the ecliptic that I've just mentioned: Regulus in Leo, Aldebaran in Taurus, Antares in Scorpio, and Fomalhaut in Aquarius. So humans were aware that there'd been cataclysms, floods, other things that went on, and they were aware that after one of these events that humanity had evolved out of a progenitor male and female archetype, and that had brought them to their point in time, which was what they thought was civilization, represented by Pegasus. And that arc on the ring of creation starts with the progenitor couple, Virgo and Bootes. They are holding onto the plough. So this is their tool for cultivation. So this is a metaphor of turning a few seed into a multitude. So you have a plough. This plough is then attached by a harness, which is the constellation Auriga, to the bull, Taurus, which is ploughing the field, and then that is connected to the field. And that is the top component of the ring of creation. And a plough, metaphorically, ploughs the land. And in Welsh, a plough is an arad. And this word ar is extremely important because it means upon. And in the context of the heavens, it is the stars upon us. So a bear is an arth in Welsh. So again, there's that component ar, which is why the plough is also called the Great Bear. And in fact, the English word bear is made up of two Welsh words, be, which means to cause, an agent, and ar, which again means upon. So that it's telling us that this component here was important, a causative agent that helped plough the field. So there you are.
Fascinating stuff. Cheers, Hugh. A couple of questions before we finish. Similar sort of questions to the previous one. Can you please explain the relevance of the mythical bird and constellation, the Phoenix, with regards to the story of the human species?
Well, this is a very good question, and it's a very difficult question to answer. So I'm going to keep it short. So what I'd ask you and viewers, what is the first thing they think of as an attribute of the Phoenix? What do you think of when you think of the Phoenix?
It commits suicide and then it rises again from the ashes.
Yeah, so Theon is to rise. On is continuity, but it's also ash, the ash tree. So Theon means rise from the ashes.
Yeah.
And ux is a suffix that means a thing. So Phoenix means the thing that rises from the ashes in Welsh. Mm-hmm. And the second part of that question was, how does it relate to
the story of the human species? Yeah.
I don't know is the short answer. And I had to limit the scope of my work to just explaining the origin of the constellations. It's not a complete explanation of human evolution. But I think it's connected to a repeating event in the heavens that sees something fiery happen, and I don't know what it is.
Okay. So I was just going to speculate, and I wondered if it was connected to Atlantis, you know, the destruction of Atlantis, and then the survivors afterwards rising from the ashes.
Yes, it might be. It might be taken then to mean that the events of this thing in the heavens that is commemorated, if you like, by the constellation Phoenix may be connected to the mythical devastation of Atlantis, because Atlantis was destroyed in a day and a night by the sea. So if something had landed in the sea and it had created a large tidal wave that had devastated all the shorelines of the Atlantic, where most of the Atlantean people may have lived, then that would explain that myth. And then afterwards, people have come back from that devastation, and it may be a random but repeating experience. So that's
Brilliant.
why they wanted to represent it in the heavens.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, we can't leave Atlantis there, Hugh. Could I ask you, would you speculate on its location at all, Atlantis? Where do you place it? Because I do know that you are a believer in Atlantis, as
I
am I.
told you that.
You did, I'm sure you did.
Well, yeah, I've got a romantic notion that it did exist. I think, there are a number of people have told the story about Atlantis. We're told that only Plato talks about Atlantis, but I think it might have been Herodotus before Plato wrote about Atlantis. And obviously, Plato told the story that a colleague of his grandfather, Solon, had been told the story by the Greek high priests. The Egyptian high priest. So, it's not one person's imagination. And when Plato wrote about Atlantis, he was coming to the end of his life. It was one of his last two pieces of work. And he didn't have to write about Atlantis, and it was quite a dangerous thing to do at the time. It's quite heretical. And his mentor, Socrates, had come to a very bad end at the hands of the Athenian magistrates, the courts, who didn't agree with his philosophy. So I think Plato really risked his reputation as well as his life and his inheritance that he was going to pass on by writing about Atlantis, which is why he wrote about it in a conversation as opposed to stating it was fact. But I think it was an important story that he wanted to preserve. And so I would give it credit to at least hear him out and try to understand it. So I think, like the Bible, which brings together a number of stories all together to create one creation that's easy to recount, and perhaps every component of reality has been merged together, so you can't really prize them apart. I would say something similar has happened to Atlantis. So I think Atlantis was a land beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which I take to be the Straits of Gibraltar. And the Greek understanding of the world at that time was that they had a very Mediterranean-centric view of the world. They called all the land to the north Europe, all the land to the south Egypt, that was all of Africa, and all the land to the east they called Asia, which was predominantly Turkey, because once they got to the Himalayas, they didn't know what was beyond that. So Atlantis was all the peoples that was west of this central frame of reference, and they were the people around the Atlantic Ocean. So they didn't have large blobs of land to name like they did Europe, Asia, and Egypt, but they thought it was a large group of peoples who were seafaring and lived beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which were the Straits of Gibraltar, and arguably lands like Mauritania and Lusitania were Atlantean kingdoms, because Atlas, the first king of Atlantis, he had 12 sons, I think, and each of them had a land. And you can analyze these names. These are very ancient names like Mauritania, Andalusia. These were probably kingdoms of Atlantis.
Wow. Well, Cormins Beaumont, somebody we both know, placed Atlantis, I believe, in Orkney, or the northern part of Britain. Conor McDarry, who wrote a book called Ancient Wisdom Preserved in the Bible and the Pyramids, he placed it in Ireland. And Andrew Collins, whose book Atlantis in the Caribbean that I've recently read, placed it in off the west tip of Cuba and the Bahamas. But what I've recently discovered is that there is supposed to be a major ley line that crosses the Atlantic Ocean between the northern part of Britain and Cuba and the West Indies and the Caribbean. So I don't know. It would all seem to be sort of kind of correlating into that area.
Well, I mean, they could all be right. You know, when you listen to or read the mythology, it says that there was a capital city, and it gives some dimensions. But it doesn't say that that was the limit of Atlantis. And even in the Greek world around the Mediterranean, there were many different people as part of the Greek Empire. They were all, the Greeks had a system of administration. Why could that not have occurred with a group of people that had lived around the edge of the Atlantic, incorporating all those people you have just referred to? You know, down to the Azores, perhaps quite a lot of places in the Caribbean, certainly around the Atlantic coast in Northern Europe and Britain and Ireland.
So what do you make of the Eye of the Sahara, which some people allege is Atlantis? Because that's quite out of the way, isn't it?
Yes, I mean there's a lot of evidence of that had water there at some point. The Eye of Sahara, the Richat structure, it's on a major fault line, and the ocean level may have changed in the past and put it right on the coast. So what will need to happen is a great expedition will need to go there and some serious archaeology be done. So until that happens, we're not going to know.
Well, on that subject, actually, I recently found out that going back to Gobekli Tepe, that particular site has been purchased by none other than the World Economic Forum. So now they basically own Gobekli Tepe. So do you see that as being a good thing or a bad thing, Hugh?
Well,
is it a potential cover-up?
I don't know about that, but I do know that the last 10 years of archaeological research at Gobekli Tepe has not been anywhere near as much as the previous 10 years. And I think this is an incredibly important ancient artifact that will tell us about our history. I mean, the amount of information that has been obtained just from the 5% that's been investigated.
Because it is only 5%, isn't it? It's a tiny fraction.
I would say, why isn't the other 95% being investigated? You know, they can fill it back afterwards if they want to preserve it for some reason. But I think that's our history. I think that belongs to all human beings, and I think if it helps our being aware of ourselves and reaching a higher level of consciousness and sophistication, civilization, then I think we should know about it. And the fact that anybody or organization has control over it and is now stopping that from happening is a bad thing.
I totally agree. We appear to have opened up a can of worms with that question. Yes, so it is very frustrating, and I mean, hopefully they will be able to excavate more of Gobekli Tepe, but the very fact that the WEF have purchased the site is, I view as being, not too good, really. But we'll see what happens. Perhaps one day they'll try and purchase the star map of Gwynedd. You never know. Hopefully not.
Well, it's already a national park. I mean, it should have a much higher status than it currently does,
Mm-hmm.
and I hope that will change over the coming years.
So do I, very much so. Okay, so what's your next move, Hugh? I have to ask you that. What are you currently working on? What's the next step for you?
I've only really just finished The Origin of Time. I finished that in March, and so I'm going to do some promotion of it. I'm going in second week in September. I'm going to be walking in Gwynedd with Lawrence Main and a group of people, and I'll be talking at various locations, and also as we go around the various sites that we're going to visit. So that's going to be a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And then I will think about my next project.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, who, just for our listeners, our viewers, who is Lawrence Main, Hugh?
Lawrence Main, he's someone who lives in Gwynedd. He's editor of the Lay Hunters Network. They have a magazine that comes out 4 times a year. He's walked most of the lays of this country. And I'll just warn you that if you ever say ley line to him, he'll go, lay! And he's an authentic druid, and he lives by the druid code as he sees it. And he's a massive repository of information. He lives in Gwynedd, just about a mile from where the Battle of Camlan was fought, where King Arthur died. And he does talks and walks in that area. If you want to, I'll send some information to you, and then you can share it with your viewers, and they can get in touch with Lawrence. He's a massive repository of information, and has helped me with the writing of my books and understanding the importance of certain sites in Gwynedd. So he's a national treasure.
Brilliant. I think it was Hamish Miller who coined the phrase ley line, if I remember rightly. And I think he later regretted it. I think Maria Wheatley told me that he was doing a touring all around England, giving talks, and he came up with the phrase between one venue and another. But I think, if I remember rightly, Maria Wheatley describes them as, I think it might be rivers of energy. They kind of ebb and flow. They're not straight lines as such. So
rivers of energy, and they're normally a pair, just like energy will pair up and flow around each other, like a telephone cable is a twisted pair.
Yeah.
So they normally call them the Michael line and the Mary line, and you can douse both of them, and they're just natural telluric currents. You get them in space as well. It's well known, scientifically documented. So any movement of current across the surface of the Earth will try to turn into a twisted pair, because it allows the energy to be conserved. So there is a massive ley twisted pair that goes down the length of Cornwall, Devon, right across central Britain up to East Anglia, and that's because of the rocks down the spine of that part of the country. Rock transmits magnetic energy at a different rate than water. So they're your two extremes. So where you have more rock, you're going to have more magnetism, and if you have more magnetism, it'll eventually turn into a twisted pair.
Well, I didn't know that. That's fascinating. I'm going to look into that. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Hugh, for your time and your knowledge.
Sure.
Your 3 books that you've written have really enriched my knowledge on so many different subjects. You know, it's incredible. So everyone, please get a copy of this book. It's one of the most important books you can read on ancient history. It's fantastic. Where can people? Where would you send people to buy your books, Hugh?
Well, to my website, originofthe.zodiac.com.
Okay, brilliant.
You can put a link in the comment section below.
Yeah, and I'll put a link into your YouTube channel as well of the same name, The Origin of the Zodiac, and there's some great videos on there for you to have a look at, everyone. So thank you, Hugh. Thanks very much for coming with me today.
It's been my pleasure, and I like to come back and do a presentation of my book and go through the different aspects in more detail with some images. We talked about it. It's been a lot of fun, but I will share some images with your viewers.
Can't wait. That'd be fantastic. Brilliant. So please like, share and subscribe, everyone, and we'll be back with another video. Cheers, Hugh.
Thanks.